I want to talk about the verb seem in English, and then we'll go back and look at it in Italian as well, because then didn't go to Italian last time and go through all that stuff just for some cool stuff about Italian. You'll see that Italian provides evidence for the story about the verb seem that I'm going to give you for English. So here's what we're looking at here is a classic construction of English that turns out to be found in many, many languages of the world, not just European languages. Not all languages have this construction, but most of them do. And most of them do with verbs just like this. Some of them have other verbs that behave in similar fashion. So what we notice about this is that we can have a sentence like this. It seems to me, and the to me doesn't have to be there, but it would be clearly an argument of the verb. It seems to me that we should do X, right? It seems that we should do X is fine as well. We don't have to put that, but that would be the experiencer argument. So seems is about something that's going on in our minds. If I say it seems that we should do that, that means I think that, or there's something about the situation that I'm aware of that makes me believe that X is true or something, right? So that there's something to do with the senses here. So it's a verb of sensation and thinking or something like that. So we can do this, right? And so this seem would have a lexical entry. We'll call this seem 1. That would be seem to. I'm just saying, I don't know, making up something, and then there's an argument, X, and then there's another argument, and the other argument I'm going to call P. So I'm putting in between brackets here, P for proposition. What exactly are we going to call the role of complement clauses? What we have here is a complement clause. It seems to me that, and we have a CP, and the CP is a whole sentence, right? And that sentence can be of any sort of structure. Well, you could call this, I think it would be legitimate to say, well, let's say that the role of this is theme, or whatever, right? But I'm just following sort of what is commonly done. There is a proposition of some kind. And in fact, when we say things like this, we're really saying, at some level, we're saying, those people know this place. And then I'm giving you some evidence about the truth value of that statement, that proposition. If I say sometimes I'm making the proposition that those people know this place. But I'm qualifying that. There's a kind of hedge. I'm saying, I don't know that for sure, but there's something about the situation that makes me think that that's true, right? And there's something visual about it as well. It seems, well, not visual, but sensory about it. There's something that I can sense, probably with the eyesight, because that's the default, that leads me to believe that this is true. So that's saying a lot, right? But this is a very common thing that languages do. Some languages would do this with what is called evidential morphology. You would just say, those people know this place, and it would be you might say something like, these people know this place, right? And means, it seems to me that, right? Or I have visual, so some languages will have a variety of those things. It will say, there is visual evidence that this proposition is true. There is, and they can pick different things. There's evidence. Some languages would say, oh, there's evidence that. And that's what seems is. It's kind of, but in our system, it's a verb that you put at the top, and then you put the proposition at the bottom. So we have a structure like this where the PP corresponds to X, and it's optional in the syntax, right? So we have a structure seems, it's a V, it will obviously be embedded in a clause. Because it's a verb, that's the default at least. So we'll have an IP there. And there'll be tense and subject and possibly subject person features can be displayed in the I node. And then the experiencer is realized as a two-headed PP complement. Because it's an argument, it's got to be a complement. And it just has to be that it is in a PP headed by 2. That's not exactly completely spelled out in the, but I'm assuming that the seem to, from that, if you have a meaning of that kind, then that would determine the to preposition of the experiencer. And then the CP is the critical piece, has to be in there. That's really, in some sense, the main argument. That's the one that has to be expressed. So there's seeming, obviously to someone, because that's the nature of seeming, and that's a qualifier semantically of the truth value of the proposition. But the proposition is what it's all about. The seem part is kind of transparent to this is mainly the proposition, so the CP has to be there. And because it's of value CP, it will necessarily have a tense value. Well, that's not said here, but we could say that in the lexical entry. CP, to spell it out more, we would say CP finite, because CPs don't have to be finite, but this one does, right? It has to be, it has to have a tense value, because you can't say things like, it seems to me for those people to know that, right? That would not be any good. We can't put a non-finite CP in that slot. And then the subject of the clause has to be dummy it, simply because English says you have to have something overt in the subject position. We want something there always. In the subject position of a tensed clause, you're going to always have something sitting in the some overt content, except in contexts where, in certain discourse contexts where you can leave off the subject, but it's kind of like it's just left off phonologically. In cases like, I can say, somebody says to me, well, you should do that, and I could just go, I'm not going to do that, right? Where I haven't said I'm not going to do that. Only if it's utterance initial, right at the beginning of an utterance, I can do that. I can't do that in general. So it's not exactly the case that you absolutely must have overt content, but that's the norm. In fact, in this case, it would be fine, right? Couldn't you say, seems to me that not much is going to happen here, right? But you wouldn't write that, right? Or you couldn't do that if it weren't utterance initial. So if I said, I know, and then I embed this whole thing under that, then I would have to put the it in, right? I know seems like someone's going to do that. No. I know it seems like something. You have to put that. So there are certain conditions, but they're highly constrained. Okay, so English has to have a subject in general, and we put the it in there. Dummy it, and we say it's to check the subject feature and the nominative case feature. There's a nominative case feature, and that gets checked. But we also have another version of seems that is described as involving raising, and what you do is raise the subject of the proposition clause. So there's going to be a proposition clause no matter what, but you can move it. This was the initial observation that was made in transformational grammar, that it seems like you can move the subject of the embedded proposition to the front of the sentence, and this was originally called, one version of the transformation was it replacement. So the idea was that you generate the sentence it seems to me that those people know this place. That's the default form. That's the basic form. And then there's a transformation that says, oh, well, you know what? We can replace that it with a noun phrase from the embedded clause. Yeah.
When you front that CP, where you say a sentence like that, those people know this place seems to me to be true, to keep the whole meaning of the sentence. Where does that to be true come from?
Say, I lost you there.
So this sentence is, it seems to me that those people know this place, right?
Yeah.
So you confront that CP.
No, not the CP. Well, I mean, that's not what we're doing here.
No, this
okay.
is just me.
Okay.
That those people know this place seems to me to be true.
That would be a different construction because you've embedded this whole thing under to be true. But if you did that, see what you're doing there is you're creating a construction that allows you to do something that in principle you should be able to do. That is, I've only got one argument other than the to me, right? Then why shouldn't that argument be able to go into the subject slot? And for some verbs, that's perfectly normal. It does happen that way. But English basically just doesn't like to have CPs in the subject slot. So that's why we throw an it in there, right? And the claim is that we're allowed to throw that it in there because it's just the subject of the whole clause, and it's not representing an argument of the verb. That's why that's what dummy it means, right? But the CP is, in fact, an argument of the verb. And in general, what we'll do in situations like this, where there is no argument subject of a verb, that's what the unaccusativity phenomenon is. I just have an object, but I need that subject slot filled, so I'll just move it up in there, right? So that construction that you were just saying was where the CP, rather than the DP, has moved up into that subject slot. You can only do that, like I'm saying, under certain scenarios. You can't do that if you don't embed it under to be true, right? So you can't say, right? You can't say those people that those people know this place seems to me. No, it's no good, right?
Yeah. So I was just wondering if that to be true is sort of underlying here somewhere.
Yeah, it's possible. I never thought of that. It's kind of. Yeah, because it's an evidential, right? Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that. That would have been I never saw that analysis, but that would have been something that might have been done in the late 60s in what was called the generative semantics version of this theory. And maybe could be reinstantiated. I'm just not sure that it means the same thing. Does this mean seems to be true? I mean, I was saying it that way, but I'm not sure. That seems to add something in my mind, but I'm not sure.
It's like in this construction, to be true is part of C.
Yeah, it could be. Could be. That's what you're saying, right?
And it just
yeah.
So it's part of the semantics of seams, but it comes out in the different constructions because seams needs that.
Yeah. It's possible. I kind of like that. That's cool. Write a paper on that. You could publish that. Maybe. I don't know. You'd have to look at it more because what you'd want to do is find substantial evidence that that's the right analysis. And the way it would come would be, if we do that, we now understand things about this construction that are otherwise mysterious, right? And I just don't know. I can't quite see that far. But that's a nice idea that hadn't occurred to me before, and I've never seen done in the literature. Okay, but what we can. So the idea is that we can. We have another construction because these two sentences have the same meaning. So using that same thought that you were doing there, and the generative semantics people were doing that, meaning is the same. Then they have the same underlying structure. They come from the same source. There's a single thing, and so the transformation would have been to convert the CP into an IP. But the way this is done nowadays is that it's not a CP in the other. So there's two versions of scene. There are two different lexical entries. And this lexical entry would have everything the same. Oh wait, that's scene one, right? Wait, I guess let's see what I'm doing here. We've got. Okay, so here's the one where we've got the CP, the finite and present tenseness of it is checked because we've got a CP with an IP that is in present tense. We've got seam is here. We've got an IP node above it. We've got a certain tense value. We've got subject value and all of that. We can put the seams in there in its present tense form. And we can put an it in there. And we've satisfied we've checked all of our features. We've got an it that is perfectly compatible with nominative. The nominative value, it's overt, it satisfies the subject requirement, and all of this is fine. But we have also another version of seam, which is this one, seam 2, and the difference is that it would have a minus finite IP complement. So the proposition argument will be realized as non-finite. And there's no reason you could say that it's a CP with an empty C. There would be no harm in doing that, but it seems sort of pointless because you don't really need it to be there. So we would have then would have an X and a Y, X experiencer, no X knows Y would be the theme. The theme would be this place. In this case, we've got the verb know. We've got both these people as the subject of know this place, put in the specifier of VP slot. We put in the IP because we're just following what the lexical entry is here. We don't need the PP, the one that to me or to her or whatever, but we need to put the whole thing into some kind of a clause structure, and we can check the features. Minus finite checks off with infinitive form of the verb. We've got know in the infinitive form, so the VP is infinitive in form, right? The to is what's making that happen at some level, right? Or the to is compatible with that. I've got a to in I. I'm minus finite if I'm a to. I'm compatible with an infinitive verb phrase. We've got a subject feature for to as well. So we then have to do some stuff, right? And the idea here would be that we also have seem being a present tense verb and having an I there that would have present tense. There's going to be a feature there because it's going to be a tensed clause. The main clauses are tensed. If it's the main clause, then we've got to have it be in some tense. We'll make it present. And we'll say that, and then that's just part of English, got to have a subject. Therefore, there's a subject nominative feature because this is a tensed verb, right? So there's features we can put in the tree, and that makes certain things happen. Those people from the embedded clause can move up into the IP node, and that allows us to check the subject feature. So this would be IPs are going to have subjects, right? We move that up there, but we still don't have a grammatical sentence, right? Seeing those people both to know this place, no, it's no good, right? Because we have to satisfy all of the constraints, all of the grammatical constraints. We move it up to that position. Those people seem to both know this place is fine, right? And notice that it means the same thing, so this is cool, right? This is consistent with what we've been saying. It makes sense to have DPs that are subjects of verbs start out in the specifier of VP slot. So this is the kind of evidence that one would use to motivate the general principle. The arguments of a predicate go into either specifier or complement slot within the phrase that is projected by that item, right? And then, because we've got the structure that we've got, the movement of those people is necessary. But actually, it's that we could also do this with both those people, couldn't we? Both those people seem to know this place would be fine as well. But what's cool is you can leave the both behind without getting any different meaning whatsoever, right? That means the same thing, right? So we've got some kind of fairly complex movement here, where a DP, either the whole DP that is the subject, or a DP leaving behind certain quantifiers like both and each and a few. There aren't very many. For whatever reason, they can be left behind, but a DP of some kind needs to move into, and has to be, in this case, it has to be nominative, right, form. So it would be they seem to know this, right, rather than them seem to know this. And so all of those things have to hold. The key thing here is that we've got, here's what we call raising. Raising means movement of something out of an embedded clause, basically. So infinitival clauses are the kind from which you move things out. Another reason one might say that, another thing that's going on is that DPs, the claim is, need to get case. They need to have their case checked. And so the assumption is that all DPs are nominative or accusative or whatever, right? A genitive, they could be different, I don't know, whatever they are, the possibilities are. And that has to be, I have to be in a place where I'm sanctioned, that my case is sanctioned. So it's necessary, therefore, for those people to move all the way up to the main clause, because the I of a tense node has a nominative feature that gets checked with a DP in there. In an earlier version of the theory, it was said that the I node of a tense clause assigns case. So it goes, I'm waiting to spray some case on something, right? And if there's nothing there, then, we've got an ungrammatical sentence. I need to assign my case. The metaphor now is the cases need to be checked by things in appropriate configurations. Okay, so that's the theory, basically. And we've got the subject and nominative features of the I node are checked. Yeah?
Just a kind of side question. So the quantifier can migrate to a couple places in the structure. Could be doing that independent of the DP?
It could be. It could be doing it independently of the claim that it is together with that thing at some point. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just because you have the DP that moves up and it occupies like 3 different places.
Right. And in this case, it doesn't seem to be able to occupy all of those places, right? So there has to be some kind of, right? I don't think you can leave it in the infinitival clause space, right? And yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is, right? It can't, so you can't say, those people seem both to know this place. Those people seem both to know this place. Not very good anyway, right? Is it grammatical? Is that grammatical? Both those people Those people both seem to know this place. That seems okay, right? In which case, though, so if that's true, then, and so to get those people both seem to know this place, right, we're going to actually have to have another specifier node in that slot, right? And the way, I guess I needed to go there, right? The way that you would get that to happen is that there would be two inodes, really, just like in Fijian. And the specifier node, right? And because what you would do, and this was actually Chomsky's original proposal, was that when this inode started to be used a lot, the original proposal was that there was an agreement subject node and a tense node. And so that slot would be open, right? But why it doesn't go into the other intermediate slot that it could go in principle isn't entirely clear. There might be, but that could be, one possibility is that, it really doesn't have to move up into that subject position at all, right? And maybe doesn't, right? I don't know. There are problems here. So the question of, another possibility is that quantifier float really is quantifier float, that it can just float around, right? But still, even if that were the case, what we would expect is that a quantifier would, if it floated off of a DP, everything about the way the grammars of languages work would suggest that it adjoins into a verb phrase within the verb phrase that it's in, and would float only upward, and that would be a clause-bounded float, right? Are you following me here? So even if that were the way that it works, this shouldn't be able to float below 2 unless there's raising under any circumstances. Does that make sense? Okay. It's a kind of a long story, but the quantifier float, you could again spend a whole quarter if you had people that were seriously interested in this stuff, and that's pretty hard to find. You have to go to you have to be in a PhD program with a bunch of really crazy people, right? That really think that there's something, that this is important stuff. Well, and it is, right? I mean, I spent a large portion of my life worrying about this stuff, right? It must be important, right? Okay, so we've got those people seem to be happy. Those people appear to enjoy movies. There are several verbs that work this way. The raising to subject construction. Those people happen to like dancing. I guess you would do it if you're going to do it with an it phrase, right? You can say, it appears that those people enjoy movies, right? That's fine. So notice that and the majority of these cases, there's a paraphrase with a dummy it subject and a CP, right? Those people happen to like dancing. Well, there you wouldn't say, it happens that those people like dancing, would you? You would in Portuguese. That's perfectly normal, right? But in English, I think, at least in my English, I would have to say, it so happens that. I would have to put a so in there to get that. But I guess maybe you can do it, I don't know. It happened that, maybe you can do it, right? In other cases, I don't know. I don't know exactly what those people are likely to be late for the show. Again, notice what they're doing. In every case, the happen is a little bit different, right? Happen is, it's just a verb that says, the meaning of it is kind of very vague, right? But it's simply got a proposition as its argument, and that same thing would be true of likely. It is likely, notice that likely and seems are both doing some kind of evaluation over the likelihood or truth value of the proposition that you're giving, right? It is likely that those people will be late for the show and so forth, right? So there's a variety of verbs that can do this. But what's interesting is that the properties of the subject of raising verb are determined entirely. This is the key thing. What you're going to get there is determined never by seems or are likely, or they don't care. They'll take anything as subject. The properties are determined by the verb of the embedded VB, of the verb embedded in the infinitival clause. So then there's like lots of evidence for whether you have raising. So if the embedded verb licenses a dummy subject, the raising verb has that dummy subject. So what I mean is there are different verbs that will allow dummy subjects. So verbs of coming into existence will allow there as their dummy subject, or the verb be. Verbs of existence and coming into existence allow be to be their subject. So you can have, there are many people on the bus. That's a proposition about many people being on the bus. The there has no, it's not a semantic argument of anything, right? Same thing here. There arose a controversy over marijuana. All you're saying is a controversy. It's the same as saying a controversy arose over marijuana, right? So here's a case, and I haven't gone into this, but this is a case that's an interesting case. One of the key constructions of English that has played a big role in the way that theories of grammar have been articulated. But we have there arose a controversy. There seems to have arisen a controversy over marijuana is fine, right? Now notice that seems or appears in and of themselves don't license a there independently of this, right? It's going to, the there can only show up as seems. This is the key thing, right? It can only show up as a subject of seems or appears or are likely or whatever, right? If that there is licensed by a kind of verb that licenses there, that's in the embedded infinitival. So there happened is likely to arise. There happened to arise a controversy. That's fine, right? There is likely to arise a controversy. That's fine. There are other verbs that license dummy it. So whether verbs, in particular, license a dummy it, and it's fine to have that. That's the one you get with appears and happens and is likely. So it appears to have rain. Now notice this is critical, right? It's not the it that comes and seems because there is a necessity for having an it. No, this is the it that's licensed by rain, but it can't stay. That it cannot stay in the embedded infinitival clause. Not okay, because it's not being able to check its case feature. It needs to move up into the main clause, and it can do that. It is likely to rain and so forth. There happens to have rain? No. Because why? Because there is not licensed by rain. Right? So you can see that these things are independent. Seems itself is not licensing there. You can't have it seems to have arisen a controversy. No good, right? Because it's not just that I need to get some subject, some dummy subject into the slot. I have to have a dummy subject that's licensed by a particular verb in certain cases, right? So here, since arose a controversy, license is there, and a controversy is staying after arose, it's got nothing in its subject slot, something has to be put in there in order to satisfy that. So here's actually the argument that you've got. It could be an argument that you need to have that subject slot in the infinitival two clauses. You need to have a subject slot to allow there to show up. How else is it going to show up? Seems can't make it show up. Seems doesn't license that. So if arose a controversy licenses the there, and the there is not an argument, it cannot go into the embedded verb phrase. It doesn't go into the specifier of VP slot, according to our theory. Oh, that's right. It could only be stuck up into the IP slot. So we have an argument, there's a potential argument here for these things being clause-like. There is an IP there of some kind. If the embedded verb requires that its subject be plural, the raising verb has to have a plural subject. Jane and Paul met at the beach. Met has to have a plural subject, right? Unless there's in the absence of two arguments being expressed. The at the beach here is not an argument. It's a locative adjunct. And so we can't say Jane met at the beach. There are two outs, like I said, right? Jane met Paul at the beach. That would be fine. But if I don't have the direct object, if the object is not there, then meet needs a plural subject. And we then get the same thing. Jane appears, seems, happens to have met at the beach is horrible, right? Seems to have met at the beach. Jane seems to have met at the beach. What it might mean, Jane met herself, met someone. I don't think you can do it at all, right? But, Jane and Paul seem to. You can satisfy. So so that's interesting, right? The subject has to be plural for meet. If I'm meet and I don't have an object complement, if I don't have a DP complement, then I've got to have a plural subject, and that plural subject requirement is met by the subject of the whole thing. That's why it's raising, right? The subject is put in the lower clause, and then it moves up to the front. And there's a slew of arguments like this for the raising analysis. If the embedded verb requires that its subject be a DP referring to a time period, the raising verb has to have a subject that is a DP referring to a time period. Just one example of the kind of thing that can happen. An hour elapsed while I looked up the words. You can't say a pound elapsed while I looked up the words, right? Because a pound is whatever, whether you're referring to money or you're referring to a weight, an amount of weight, it's not something that elapses, right? It could do something else maybe, but it won't do that. So a pound seems, appears, happens to have elapsed. Well, bad, right, for the same reason. But fine, an hour seems, appears, right? So this is what is called a selectional restriction. The verb, the semantics of the verb put constraints over what the subject can be. If the subject, another sort of classic piece of evidence for raising is that if the embedded verb is part of a subject containing idiom, that subject is the subject of the raising verb. So we have things like, the devil is in the details. And this is an idiom. One of the ways we know it's an idiom, right? The devil is in the details is that we aren't talking about no actual devil. It's a non-referring expression, for which reason you can't say, the devil is in the details and he's really awful, where the he refers back to the devil, right? So this is an idiom. The devil seems to be in the details. It's fine, right? The devil appears to be in the details. Seems to be okay, right? The shit has hit the fan. Can you still say that? Obviously, that you're not talking about literal theses or anything, right? And you can't say things like, I guess you're trying to be funny, right? You could say, oh, the feces is going to hit the fan. But it's not kind of the normal thing to do. And it's fine to say this shit seems to have hit the fan. I guess I messed this up. Happens to be in the details. I didn't fix the sentence. But you can say that, right? The shit seems to have hit the fan. That's fine, right? But that's something that's licensed. That's part of an idiom. It's part of a thing that all goes together as a unit. And so those are all some of the classic arguments for having raising. Now, let's go back just to, I want to remind you about our observations concerning auxiliary selection in Italian that we went over last time. So just quickly remind you how that works. There are there's a have or a be auxiliary that are used to indicate past tense or perfective aspect. It can be either one. So we've got here the students studied at Oxford, and we've got an auxiliary to indicate past tense, but we use the auxiliary have. And the reason is that study has an agent argument, and the agent argument is stuck in by the default rules. It's the specifier of VP. So the agent is the specifier by default, right? And then the reason we use, and we have other cases like this, right? Where you have intransitive verbs that use avere. And then here's a case where you get essere with an intransitive verb. And the analysis that we have is that, well, that's a theme. Theme is DP by complement DP by default. And then it moves up into the subject of the clause slot, and we get the ship sank. And we get essere is here because and we get the past participle form agreeing with ship. So ship is the feminine singular, and the past participle now has to be feminine singular, right? And all of that is because we've got rules that the perfect auxiliary is essere. If the I node checks its person features with a DP, we have to say it, this is being very explicit. If the person features of the DP that the I node checks with are not in the specifier of VP position, then we get essere. It's actually a fairly simple rule. And kind of a strange one. Why would you do that? But that's the way it works. It has really something to do with the amount of agentivity of the subject at some level, right? So there's a semantic basis for this. And if the past participle agrees in number and gender with the only thing that it can ever agree in number and gender with in Italian is something that is a DP complement at some level. That's all it cares about. And in the case that it's essere as well. Okay, so we go and we look at seems in Italian. So this is really cool because Italian has a verb that is cognate with seem in English, sembrare. And it works like English, right? So we can have, here we have the embedded clause is capirlo, gli studenti capirlo, where it's infinitive. So this is a minus finite verb. It's got an IR on the end and then a lo. The lo is actually indicating that the object is, it's like Fijian, right? But a little bit more information is there. The capir is the verb in the infinitive form, and then lo, it says, I have a definite object that is third person singular, masculine. All of that information is encoded on the lo. I'm skipping that here because it's not critical for what we're looking at, but it's kind of like that definite object affix on the verb in Fijian in some cases, right? Not exactly, but it's very similar in some ways. But we've got raising then, because sembrare is a verb that only has a proposition argument and just like English, right? It wants an IP proposition that is not, it's not, I don't have it here, but the IP has to be non-finite with an infinitive verb, therefore. And then, so the question then is, well, what's the auxiliary going to be? In order to give us past tense meaning, we have to have a past participle, and we've got that. Sembrato. But we also need to have an auxiliary, and it has to be either be or have, and it should be what? What do we predict? Huh? No. No, right. No, right? Wait, I didn't get it in there. Here we go. The auxiliary has to be it's not sono sembrato. You have to change the. You have to change it to sembrati. Gli studenti sono sembrati with the form of essere. How could that be? Well, the subject of the seems clause isn't an argument of seems, and therefore isn't instantiated in the VP, in the specifier of VP, though. It's something that came from down below. But where did it come from down below? Well, it must have come from the capirlo clause, from the infinitive clause. So the theory of raising for verbs like this works out the same way in Italian as it does in English. And Italian gives a different kind of evidence for it. That is that you get the auxiliary essere. Okay, cool. Now, the hard thing at some level about the raising construction is that it is superficially, in terms of the structure and the words and the grammatical glue and everything, it's indistinguishable from another construction that we want to treat differently. So if we have the senator seems to have lied, that's the raising construction. And we also have things like the senator intends to lie. That looks to be the same thing, right? The senator seems to be in trouble. I guess you have to kind of change with intend. You have to change the senator. With seems, it wants to have mostly some kind of it wants to have a stative. Actually, seems wants to have something, and you have to. What you do then is to put in auxiliaries for whatever reason, right? Seems to have lied, rather than seems to lie. I guess you could say that, right? Senator seems to lie. Yeah, the senator seems to lie a lot. The senator intends to lie a lot. The senator hopes to lie a lot. The senator likes to lie a lot. There's a whole bunch of verbs that can go in that same structure. But they're going to be treated as quite different animals because of the way that they behave, the ways that they behave. And the difference is basically that, I mean, think about it. If you think about it, seems fairly clearly doesn't have its subject in this raising construction as an argument. And that's all that stuff we went through is different kinds of evidence for that claim. Whereas in the case of the senator intends to lie, intends means what? What kind of a thing is intend? It's a cognitive process whereby an individual develops a plan with respect to some future action, right? And the argument that is the future action actually can't be a CP, can it? The senator intends that the vote will be passed. Can you say that? It's weird anyway, right? Maybe you could say intends for the people to understand his bill. That would work, right? Because there's something about intending, wanting a future scenario. And the way you get that is with an infinitival clause at some level, right? But so in any case, there are some differences like that. Whereas seems cannot have a for-to complement. So the difference boils down to, at some level, that seems, like we said, the semantics of it is it's fairly vacuous. It's only telling you something about the speaker's degree of knowledge about the main proposition, and the main proposition is in the embedded clause. Whereas here, this is really a statement about the cognitive process of the senator. That's what we're mainly talking about here. And the to lie, this is not a proposition at all about, or that's not what it's mainly about. So the difference, that's a critical difference, right? The senator intends, the senator is an argument of intent, and therefore is in the specifier of VP. Notice that's in the specifier of VP slot. Okay, so although they appear to be superficially identical, the verb, and one of the things that's true about this is that the verb on the surface has an infinitival complement whose subject is construed as being the same as its own, right? That's true about both seems and intend, right? If we say the senator intends to lie, the only possible interpretation is that the senator has some intention, and that intention is that he, the senator, lie. That's the only possible interpretation. Just like in the senator seems to have lied, it has to be the case that you construe the liar as being identical with the senator. There's no other possibility. So those are, but they differ in various ways. The evidence of the subject being an argument of the main verb only occurs with the subject control construction. So intend, the claim is going to be that verbs like intend are subject control verbs. They're going to have an argument, the basic stories are going to be, they're going to have an argument that forces the IP, the embedded IP, to have no subject at all, and that has it be the case that that missing subject is interpreted as having the same index, as co-referential, as being the same as the subject of intent. So the senator seems to bother the president, the senator intends to bother the president. Looks okay, right? The news seems to bother the president, the news intends to bother the president. No good, right? Because why? Because the news doesn't intend stuff, right? It cannot intend some future action to occur. The writers of the news, you could probably come up with some metaphorical interpretation where you personify the news, but otherwise you can't, right? But seems doesn't care. Give me any infinitival construction at all, any embedded clause that I can do that. So we have the proposition argument of seem is realized as an IP. It's the subject of that IP raises up to the main clause. In the case of intend, we have X intends P, right? You have two arguments there, not just one. And the P is, again, realized as an IP, but the X is necessarily realized by the theory. The theory says if you're an argument of a verb, then you must be in either complement or specifier position of the VP that verb projects, right? So we put that one into, did I do this right? But it's not raising though. there's a relationship between those, but it's not the relationship of raising. It's a different relationship that is known as control. And the way that control works is that we have an empty DP in the subject slot of the embedded IP. And that empty DP is known as pro, or big pro, where pro is the terminology that was used for empty pronouns of a kind, or empty pronominal things. This is kind of like an empty reflexive pronominal, because it has to be close by. It has to, this one has to have the subject of the immediately the constraint on this big pro is that the subject of the immediately superordinate, the next highest up clause, the subject of that clause determines my value. So it's like as if you were saying the senator intends for himself to lie, but we don't bother with it for himself, right? Actually, we can say that, right? But we normally just let that go because presumably the semantics of intends entails that the intender be involved in whatever the action is that is intended, right? So we're allowed to just leave off that DP and have it be null. In fact, more than that, we're required to. If we just have an IP embedded under intent, the only possibility is for the subject of that embedded clause to be covert, to be. You could look at this in different ways. You could look at this as being a kind of ellipsis, right? But it's a required ellipsis. And it's a required ellipsis that occurs only in certain configurations. That's the key thing. And the configuration that it occurs in looks just like a raising construction, right? So it's an interesting phenomenon. Can I just do this? Sorry. So we have lie has we have intend and seem. They have their properties. Lie has some properties, and it's going to say that X acts in a lying way, or something like that, right? X act. And so there's an argument that lie has, and that argument is instantiated. Actually, it's instantiated inside the lower VP, and then moves up to the subject position of the embedded clause, right? I'm just not showing that because I ran out of room on the slide, but that's the way, because if I'm a verb lie and I have an actor argument, an actor or agent argument, then that has to be the subject of the VP that I project. And then it has to move up to the IP slot to check off the subject features, right? So the key thing here is that the senator in this construction, in the intends construction, is an argument of lie, but it's also an argument of the verb intends, of the main verb. I thought I did this already. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. So seem works in a different way. There is no argument that goes into the main clause, whereas there is with intent. Right? So then we look at it, there's some differences that we predict by this analysis, and we look and see if they turn out to be true. So only the raising to subject construction allows its subject to be dummy it with a CP complement, and that is true. We also only the raising to subject construction allows its subject to be a dummy whose presence is determined by the embedded verb. So we went through this before, right? So you can have there seems to have been a mistake, but not there intends to be a mistake. Right? Ungrammatical, because why? Why would that be ungrammatical on the subject control construction? That's going to be ungrammatical. Because why? Because there only shows up in clauses where there is no subject argument, and it could be, in to be a mistake, right? There to be a mistake, that's fine, right? There was a mistake, there to be a mistake. In principle, that could occur. But if it did occur, then that would have to be an empty there. And there's no such thing as an empty there, in some sense, right? Because if it were the case, think about it, if there were the subject of intend, that wouldn't work. Because why? Because intend says, I need to have, as an argument, I have someone, I have actually an animate being that is capable of intention. And there doesn't quite make it. Under any interpretation of there, that cannot refer to an animate being. So the fact that it's compatible with to be a mistake is irrelevant here. It's irrelevant because of the semantic properties of intent. Yeah.
Instead of an animate being, could you say that intent requires an entity? Because you could say
whatever. Yeah.
Say like the party was intended to be fun.
Was intended to, but notice what you did there. That's not the subject of intent. The party was intended to be fun is underlyingly, people intend the party to be fun. And then it's passivized.
So you do need sessions.
The party is the underlying theme, not the underlying experiencer, right? You need sentience for intent. And that would be the case. So that's really, at some level, when you're looking, well, do I have control or do I have raising? In most cases, all you have to do is look for that. Am I a verb that implies sentience, right? If I am, then I'm a control verb. The cat seems to be out of the bag. The cat intends to get out of the bag. The cat intends to get out of the bag? Meaning where the cat's out of the bag means what? It's like, well, oh, the secret. It's no longer secret. Something was found out, right? The cat intends to get out of the bag? No good, right? Why? Because the cat doesn't refer to anything. The cat is not a sentient being. But it's okay with seems, right? So all of those cases where we said, oh, well, look, here's what seems does. It allows stuff to happen like this, right? But intend will never allow any of that stuff. The shit intends to hit the fan. Well, I guess if you're being really, saying, well, problems want to happen, right? The shit wants to. Those people seem to both get into a lot of trouble. Both those people seem to get into a lot of trouble. That's fine, right? Into trouble a lot. And those have the same meaning as it seems that it seems that each of them gets into trouble, right? And they could get into trouble independently of each other, right? Those people seem to both get into trouble a lot, right? That's fine, right? Both those people seem to get into trouble a lot. It's okay, right? And it has the same meaning, and it means that each of them gets into trouble. a lot. Both those people intend to get into trouble a lot. That's fine, right? Each of them intends to get into trouble. It's compatible with that meaning, right? They don't necessarily have to get into trouble together, do they? They could, but it's not. It's irrelevant. But if we do it with, if we do put it, it's sort of not very good to put it into the embedded clause. But if you do put it into the embedded clause, those people intend to both get into trouble a lot. Then the meaning is different. Each intends for them to get in trouble together, right? Because why? Because the both now is an argument of the embedded clause, and it gets a different interpretation. Because why? There's not a raising context here.